Well, hello, my lovely lilies. I wanted to try something a little different. Instead of a normal creepypasta or a true story, I wanted to try a list of movies. And not just any movies, but a list of horror movies based on New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve / New Year's themed horror movies are an interesting bunch. There's not really a ton of them, but there always seems to be more than I remember. I think the tricky part is that New Year's Eve doesn't involve the same sort of decorations one gets with Halloween or Christmas. So, unless a movie takes place at a New Year's Eve party, it can be a little tricky to actually realize it is happening on New Year's Eve. Fortunately, there are some pretty good options out there. So, if you want to have a little New Year's Eve horror marathon, I've got you covered. Without further ado, close the blinds, dim those lights, cuddle under your favorite blanket, and let's begin. The Phantom Carriage, 1921, directed by Victor Jostrom. I bet you didn't anticipate seeing a silent, Swedish horror film from 1921 make my list, now did you? If you didn't, you anticipated wrong. And if you know me personally, you would know that I love old films. I love old silent films. And on occasion, I even like to read subtitles. But I really wouldn't have a list without Victor Jostrom's The Phantom Carriage. Based on Selma Lagerlöf's novel, Thy Soul Shall Bear Witness, The Phantom Carriage is the story of a drunk who is picked up by a supernatural carriage on New Year's Eve, and he is forced to reflect back on his life by the eerie driver. It's kind of like A Christmas Carol, but set on New Year's Eve and on a carriage. Not only is The Phantom Carriage a great film, but is also wildly influential. The special effects were groundbreaking for the time, and the structure with which the story unfolds was unheard of in 1921. It was Ingmar Bergman's favorite film, and played a large role in shaping his films. The Phantom Carriage's influence can be seen in a number of horror films, most notably in the axe through the door scene in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. In 2001, the Criterion Collection released a beautifully restored version of The Phantom Carriage on Blu-ray. Get that and watch it on New Year's Eve. New Year's Evil, 1980, directed by Emmett Alston. New Year's Evil is one of the New Year's Eve themed horror movies that everyone always seems to remember. Probably because it has the best or worst name. In addition to the title, the plot of New Year's Evil also makes the best use of New Year's Eve, as the plot revolves around a killer who vows to kill one girl at the stroke of midnight each time zone, with the final murdered plan for 12 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. There's a lot about New Year's Evil that appeals to me, and maybe it might appeal to you. I love that we know we're dealing with a ticking time bomb right off the bat. I enjoy the attempt to give us a nice 80s punk / new wave vibe. Unfortunately, the filmmakers didn't or couldn't get a real new wave band to participate in the film, which would have pushed it over the top. The problem is that the film is oftentimes wrongly, at least in my opinion, classified as a slasher. Slasher elements are present, of course, but as a whole this isn't a slasher, at least not as we know them today. Instead, New Year's Evil plays more like a gritty 70s thriller, much akin to what Clint Eastwood was pumping out at the time. The result is still a good movie, but not really a slasher. Terror Train, 1980, directed by Roger Spottiswoode. Next to New Year's Evil, Terror Train is likely the next go-to film for horror fans wanting to celebrate New Year's. This one opens with a terrible prank played on a pledge to a pre-med student fraternity on New Year's Eve. 3 years later, the pranksters celebrate the coming year with a costume party on a train, and one by one, they're each picked off. Is the victim of the prank out to get his revenge? Probably, but no spoilers here. I think there's a lot to love with Terror Train. For starters, it takes place on a train, which I happen to think is pretty cool and a little different. Then you have Jamie Lee Curtis. And if you don't like Jamie Lee Curtis, well, I think you might be a monster. And it features a ton of great costumes, including a Groucho Marx costume. All that adds up to love. Oh, and about 25 minutes in the movie basically pauses to allow us to enjoy a David Copperfield magic show. Kind of rad. End of Days, 1999, directed by Peter Hyams. End of Days is the story of how Satan tries to impregnate a woman to force her to give birth to the Antichrist on, you guessed it, New Year's Eve, 1999, just in time for the new millennium. Arnold Schwarzenegger stars as an alcoholic ex-cop named Jericho Kane. Kind of an awesome name, huh? He blames God for the death of his family. I first saw End of Days when it came out in 1999. I believe I might have been anywhere from 8 to 10. Back then, I thought it was pretty frickin' awesome. Having not seen it since then, I'm going to proceed as if indeed it's pretty frickin' awesome, knowing full well that it could actually be quite terrible. End of Days is a good versus evil, Schwarzenegger versus Satan, but really it's about Y2K potentially destroying mankind, which was the big fear back in 1999. I may have been young, but I can still remember that. It turns out we were right to fear Y2K. It did eventually destroy humanity. It just took about 16 years longer than any of us were expecting. On a side note, if you were a wrestling fan in the late 90s, early 2000s, how awesome is it that there's a movie that deals with Y2K with a hero named Jericho? Antisocial, 2013, directed by Cody Callahan. Antisocial is, in my opinion, a really fun modern-day Canadian infection flick. A group of friends gather for a New Year's Eve party when seemingly random displays of brutal violence pop up all over the world. It's soon discovered that this violence is the result of an infection that is being spread via social media, most notably through a Facebook-like site known as Social Red Room. There are some really good ideas at play in Antisocial. It's like a millennial attempt at social commentary. Unfortunately, those ideas never quite pay off and turn into something bigger and better like you want them to. But there's a lot of gory fun to be had along the way. It's an infection movie that morphs into a slasher. Now isn't that awesome? Ghost Keeper, 1981, directed by Jim Makachuk. I'm including the Canadian film Ghost Keeper in this video. Now, I've never actually seen Ghost Keeper, and from what I can tell, not a whole lot of people have, but it has developed a cult following over the years. The best story appears to be about a group of friends that decide to celebrate the new year by taking a trip to the Rocky Mountains for some snowy fun. The fun ends when they get trapped in by a blizzard. At this point, it sounds like the film either turns into a slasher or a creature feature about a Wendigo, or maybe both. I think this movie sounds like it could be kind of cool. And I think it'll be my New Year's Eve movie for this year. But what's really cool is that Jim Makachuk, the man who wrote and directed Ghost Keeper, went straight from making this movie and into writing episodes of Heathcliff and the Cadillac Cats. That's amazing. Alright, my lovely lilies, thank you so much for watching the new video. If you can, hit that subscribe and like button, comment below and tell me your thoughts. Also, don't forget to tap the little notification bell so you're always in the know on this channel. As well, guys, you can always find me on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and always you can hit me up in my emails. Feel free to send me your stories, whether they're fiction or totally true. I'm always up for some great stories. And oh, by the way, until next time, sweet dreams.